everyone, those of you that are seeing us live on Facebook and those of you that have joined us on the Zoom platform. I suspect there will be more people joining us on the Zoom platform as we go along. So just be mindful that their microphones may be active. Can I ask that all those people that are actively on the Zoom platform, please can I ask that you mute yourselves so we'll be able to start the program shortly. As I did say, I'm admitting people into the Zoom platform, so it's a tandem role for those people that are viewing on Facebook as well. On behalf of the 1860 Heritage Center, I'd like to officially begin the program by welcoming you all to this tribute to an academic who's retiring, but I suspect there's more work for her in the years ahead. In fact, Ghulam had pointed out that she'd be probably more busier than when she was in her working days, and I suspect, well, at least from home. It gives us a great pleasure and honor to be able to pay tribute to someone who's contributed immensely to South African history and being able to mold and forge many young academics. And I suspect that role will continue in the years ahead. So without delaying the program too long, I'd like to hand over to the program director. He's the head of our History Society at the 1860 Heritage Center, a retired professor as well, and I certainly keep him on his toes in keeping many of the programs operational at the 1860 Heritage Center. Professor Jairam, I'd hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Selwyn. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible. You can go ahead.
Yeah. Let me begin by thanking Selwyn, who works very studiously and conscientiously in putting this program together. And we're very grateful for him, and his technical skills are just, wonderful. I want to make a few introductory comments before we get on with the question of interviewing and engaging with Professor Mesthrie. On behalf of the History Society based at the Heritage Center, I want to extend a very warm welcome to all our participants in this webinar, particularly to Professor UMA DHUPELIA-MESTHRIE and her family, and especially to people from outside the country. The COVID-19 pandemic has set back the activities of the History Society, and I'm glad we are able to revive the program through this webinar this afternoon. The University of the Western Cape was established as a separate higher education institution for the so-called colored community as part of the apartheid dispensation in the 1960s. Over the years, it has evolved from a so-called bush college, as the students at one time, termed it. It became the vanguard of the struggle against apartheid, to the intellectual home of the left, and latterly as one of the country's leading research and teaching institutions. Professor UMA DHUPELIA-MESTHRIE, together with other scholars, for a period of over 40 years, was one of the key contributors to the transformation at UWC. Her outstanding contributions to relevant historical research, to a wide range of publications, of books and research papers, of teaching, administration, and community work has become legendary. And it is fitting that we pay tribute to those accomplishments this afternoon. If I may be personal for a moment, I have a soft spot for UWC, having spent over a decade there working in the 1970s and 1980s, first under Director Richard van der Ross and then under Jakes Gerwel. It is those men, in those very difficult years of apartheid, that laid a solid foundation for UWC. Mesthrie, it is appropriate, I think, for me to mention that your late brother, Satish DHUPELIA, who was a member of this board of the 1860 Heritage Center, also one of the active members of the History Society, his larger-than-life and his dedicated community work we all greatly miss. With these introductory remarks, I want to pass you over to Ghulam Wahed, who will be conducting the interview with you. Unfortunately, Ghulam is indisposed. He's got a sore throat and he could hardly speak, but he did say he will be joining the seminar. But we are very grateful for Ghulam, a fellow historian at the University of Natal, a professor of history there, who has framed for us a set of questions. I will put those questions first, some of them, and then the others will be taken up by Selvin. And here's Ghulam speaking. Ghulam, are you joining us? Are you available today? I'm not sure he's with us.
I'm here. I'm there.
Okay, Ghulam, good to have you with us. Are you able to speak?
No, not really.
That's okay. All right. Here is Ghulam speaking through me. I would like to begin by congratulating you, that is Professor Mesthrie, on your retirement from UWC. In some ways, I'm envious teaching because teaching and administrative duties at universities have become unbearable. I would like to record my appreciation for the body of work that you have produced, as it is your work, as well as that of others like Professor Barnard, Bill Freund, and Joy Brain, that provided a solid foundation for people like Kalpana and myself to work with. Hopefully, the many young historians today will continue to develop this work with the new lines of inquiry. UMA, with those few words, I think Ghulam then has the following questions that he wants to address to you. First, tell me a bit about your upbringing in what is now known as the Caspar area in Durban. Was it always called the Caspar when you were growing up? A bit about the legendary building you grew up in, the kinds of things you got up to as a child, and your
Recording
education.
in progress.
Yes, thank you. And Ghulam, I'm glad you can be here, even though you aren't able to speak. So thank you very much for that. And thank you also for the questions that you're going to put me through this afternoon. I want to thank the Historical Society and the 1860 Heritage Center for organizing this event. I actually was so moved when I received the email from Prof. Reddy. I also wanted to say how wonderful it would have been had I been in the hall where these meetings are held. It would have been a visit to Durban and a very lovely atmosphere in the hall. But I was born in Douglas Lane in the Warwick Avenue area, and that's something that the great Omar Badsha and I have in common, is that we started off in that same area in Douglas Lane, and I want to get Omar to one day take me there. But just before I turned one, my family moved to Kismet Arcade, which was a brand new building in Prince Edward Street that was built by V.N. Mohammed. Now, this building was actually quite an elite building, new building that we moved into. And what was really nice about it was the cosmopolitan nature of the building. Although we were a Gujarati family, we were surrounded by people from every possible religion and also races. And unfortunately, as the group areas act hit, some of our families who were then classified colored moved out of the building. But it was a very cosmopolitan building, and my father had his textile shop in Bond Street, where he used to import material, chiffons and nylons from Singapore. And we used to spend a lot of time in that area. So my street was Prince Edward Street, but we never said it. It had nothing to do with the royal family, because in the way we pronounced it, it was Prince Edward Street. You had to say it all quickly and all in one word. And so it was never related. Victoria Street was quite unlike Queen Victoria. We spent a lot of time in Victoria Street because the library was there. On the one hand was the Macheni and the Victoria Street Market. The Macheni was the place where the African workers used to drink. Apartheid was very good at providing drink halls for the African labor force. And so when we talk about the Grey Street area, I never see it as a purely Indian area, but I see it as very much part of the African city. And in fact, when I moved to Cape Town, I actually missed this aspect of Durban so much, because Durban in many ways is one of the truer African cities that we have.
Thank you very much, Ilma. Ghulam, you've got a wide range of questions. Forgive us, we're going to skip some of them. But the next one, Ilma, what role did Phoenix play in your early years, especially the politically vibrant late 1960s, when young activists like Steve Biko and Rick Turner spent some time there? Were you present when the NIC was revived?
So, although we lived in this really exciting Durban city area, we spent all our weekends at Phoenix with my grandmother, Sushila Gandhi. So she actually played an immense role in our upbringing. We said prayers in the Sarvodaya house, which is what is today known as the Gandhi House. And we were very aware of the clinic that was running there when we were children. The printing press had stopped in 61, but the clinic ran, and you had African patients coming there, doctors from the cities, and we got lifts with the doctors. Amongst the medical students who used to come there was Steve Biko and others. So what I remember most about was the 2nd of October gatherings at Phoenix, where people from all political affiliations used to come. So it was Ellen Payton, but then you'd have the NIC crowd, and Srini Mudli and Sats Cooper from the BC were also present there. So what I remember most about the NIC was an extremely noisy meeting where Srini and Sats Cooper spoke very strongly against the formation of the Natal Indian Congress. I have a very vivid memory of a very rowdy meeting there. I also I was so fortunate to have attended the workshops that were held at Phoenix. These were school camps and student camps. And so you were taught how to, plant, going to the garden and then cook your own food and work quite hard. And we were treated to a range of lecturers, among them S.S. Singh, Jerry Kuvadia came, but Fatima Mir was very good. She came to teach us art, and there were many, many political lectures. So I consider myself really fortunate to have had this double experience of having grown up in the city, but the access to such a farm as Phoenix Settlement.
Thank you, Emma. Do you have any particular reminiscences of meeting or hearing Steve Biko and Rick Turner?
Rick Turner, unfortunately not. He was there when he organized the very first workshop. In fact, he started these work camps, and I didn't attend that particular first one, and so no, unfortunately not. But I did attend later ones.
Okay, thank you. So about your UDW experience. What was the political atmosphere like at UDW? Why did you choose to study history? Who were your lecturers in history, and how did they treat students? Which of your lecturers were key in shaping you as a historian?
Well, one of the first things that I learned about UDW was on the very first day we expected to go to, the prime agenda for the day on opening day was the rector's speech. And I soon learned that nobody went to the rector's address. He was SP Olafir, who was a known Broederbond. And so the time that I was there, this was the heightened authority of the Broederbond at UDW. Some of our lecturers, I actually wonder how I ever became a historian, because our History 1 lecturer, whose hero was Verwoerd, actually hated the Indian students that he took. And I made a resolution in first year history to never open my mouth, which was very difficult for somebody like me. But I survived that first year lecture. Unfortunately, we had better lectures after that, and that particular lecturer left. And in terms of influences, there was no teaching of radical historiography in the curriculum. So whoever was there during the time that I was a student, we were never exposed to that. It's something that one had to learn after one lost the influence of the lecturers. In terms of the influences of the lecturers, I think Joy Brain was my master's supervisor. So I'm very grateful to her for the disciplinary aspects of teaching me the skills of writing and argument. She was very, very tough on that. But Joy Brain also belonged to a particular belief of what history was. So when I had Luli Kalinikos, I was appointed as a very young lecturer at the age of 24. And when I had Luli Kalinikos on my desk, she says, "Is that the kind of history we're going to be teaching now?" So, there are all these mixed stories of people who helped you, but they also were quite conservative. Prof. Surendra Bana was another influence. I think he was really very important because before even, we talk about mentoring today, but before that word was even invented, he was mentoring me. And so I wrote one of my first articles with him, not my very first, but on Indians, on historiography. And I learned how one crafts an argument, and I was amazed at his writing. So they were very important influences, but I have to say that the influences on me as a historian would continue to improve as I moved outside the UDW sphere and exposed myself to historians, for instance, at the University of Natal in Maritzburg, where John Wright, immediately when he knew what I was working on, he would say, "Have you read this?" And so I began to read a different kind of literature, and the influences on me would continue to grow, particularly when I moved to the University of Cape Town. And I was a teaching assistant for Prof. Colin Bundy and Prof. Christopher Saunders. So I don't want to jump the gun, but UWC, if I have to look at what shaped me as a historian, it was my 28 years at UWC that was the most significant in shaping me as a historian, where one learned different, not just social history, but moving beyond social history. And so I began to think about history in a very different way when I came to UWC. If you had to compare UDW and UWC, UDW was a very authoritarian place. And at UWC, one experienced freedom where junior lecturers actually gave the senior staff quite a difficult time. And so I found this anti-authoritarianism totally refreshing, and the approach to the discipline of history. And I'd like to mention my colleagues Siraj Rasool, Leslie Witz, Paulo Israel, and Pindi Nyaka, and Coney Benson, who are on site here, who continue to inspire me in, the learning that we have never ends.
Thank you, Uma. Let me remind the audience that the questions I'm putting here are questions that have been framed by Ghulam Wayed. And Ghulam's next question is this: I would suggest that one of the most important contributions that you made as a lecturer was the third year project, where students had to write on family members. Not many know about those, but they are excellent historical sources. Tell us a bit about that, where the idea came for it from, and what purpose it served.
So Prof. Bana was very instrumental in stimulating work on indentured workers and Prof. Brain. And so I was a very junior lecturer teaching third year, and I often ask forgiveness of all those people whom I taught when I was a very young, inexperienced lecturer. But one of I was a third year lecturer, and so we decided to set instead of the normal assignment, which was based on readings, to set a family history project. And so they had to interview their family members and write about this. This was actually extremely moving because everybody was rushing off to find out their indentured history backgrounds. And so we had the most amazing collection of essays. It took me ages to mark them, but students interviewed their grandmothers and grandfathers, and suddenly their family members became the subjects of history, which was so different from my first year experience, where Indians were regarded as a problem and Black history was never taught. And here suddenly students are, their parents and grandparents were the subjects of history instead of being the problems of history. So it was a very moving experience, and all those essays are there in the UDW, the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center, and some of them are extremely good, but they were full of photographs. The students put their photographs, and I eventually had to tell them, you shouldn't include them, just copy them, but there are many original photographs in those Roots essays.
It would seem to me, it would be great if some of those very precious essays, were published so that, the people can have the correct access to it. I don't know if that's going to be possible at all.
I think it should be up to the Luthuli Documentation Center to actually scan them and, make them available digitally. I fortunately photocopied a few, and I had a few of those, and I actually used them in one of the books that I wrote, Not Slave, Not Free, with Candy Malherbe. I based 2 of the indentured stories there that I told on students' essays. So that was, quite remarkable that students provided all that information about their family. One of them was Madri Mahazu, a railway worker, and the other was Chingi Anamuntu, who was a indentured woman. So I was able to tell the story of a railway worker and a story of an indentured woman, and use those students' essays in this book.
Thank you. The next question is, while you did spend some time at Yale, do you ever regret not going abroad to do postgraduate work, where resources were considerably better in the 1980s, classes were larger, and there was much intellectual engagement from an early period?
I have to say, if you think about my honors year, I was the only student, full-time student. It was a very, very lonely experience, being an only honors student. My master's, again, I was then the only master's student in the whole department. And I moved to the University of Natal for my PhD, but I have to say I've never really felt part of the University of Natal history department. And so I think in retrospect, it would have been good, but it didn't, I kind of got engaged and married while working on my PhD. And so, it didn't occur to me. And I think the opportunities weren't as many as they are today. But I don't regret it, because for my PhD, I actually went to New Delhi and spent 6 months there. That was an absolutely amazing experience of working in the National Archives of India and attending the Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Library and Museum, where the postgraduate students there had their seminars, and I joined those seminars. So I think the important thing is to to always be to network and to speak to as many people, to go to as many places as possible, and you learn from that. So to students today, I would say yes, go, but I don't really. It's not something I think about and regret,
Well, before discussing your other work, tell us a bit about your family. How did you meet Rajend? If that's not too sensitive, why did you move to Cape Town? And your daughter, what is she doing? How did the move to Cape Town shape your work as a historian?
So if you have to ask Rajen how we met, he would say we met in the lift at the University of Durban Westville. We were both teaching in the same block. I was on the 4th floor, and I think he was on the 6th floor. And he said something, "Oh, how are you down there?" Looking down at me. But Kirti, my sister's here, and I think she was a student of Rajen's, and she played a very big role. So she's guilty of this liaison that ultimately was formed. Things happened for good reasons. I had resigned from Durban Westville to pursue my PhD full time. And if you think of PhD students today, they have they were given a lot of they are given a lot of support, but there was no support. I asked the university at Durban Westville if I could have 2 years off to finish off, the PhD, and they said no, you couldn't have leave like that. And so I resigned, and so that made our move to Cape Town actually easier because Rajen didn't have to worry about me at all. And so he was offered a very good position here. So that is how we came here. And I started off teaching at the University of Cape Town as a teaching assistant, then working with Wilmot James in the sociology department under the Group Areas Project. So I think coming to Cape Town was really important. The fact that I got a position after several years of being in Cape Town at the University of the Western Cape was very, very important to me. I shifted work and began to write about forced removals. And so in Cape Town, I'm very much known for my work on forced removals, and in particular, my work on the Black River community, which was a community that lived just across the Rondebosch Common, just 300, people who were removed from there. And so that is the kind of work that I'm known for. And I've subsequently written on land restitution. And I taught with the program of land and agrarian studies. And so I think the move to Cape Town was really very, very good because, so this is what I would recommend is try and move around as much as you can, and I'm very glad that I found a permanent home at the University of the Western Cape.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to, Selvin, I hope you're around. I'm going to hand over to Selvin to continue with the questions. Selvin, would you take over?
Yes, happy to take over.
All right, I'll mute myself.
Okay, great. It's difficult to be put into the shoes of Ghulam, and these are Ghulam's questions. Although I'm just as tall as Ghulam, it's very difficult as a social historian to be asking these questions. So thank you so much, Ghulam, for putting these questions together in being able to listen to Uma. Uma, your PhD is one of the most important works on South African history. It's a brilliant study of a unique institution and also covers what we may loosely call politics of moderation. To me, it's a travesty that it has not been published. Hopefully, we'll convince you as the 1860 Heritage Center to do so. And it's not been circulated widely. I don't think you fully realize how important this study is. Tell us a bit about it, and how did you do the research, and do you intend to rework it into a book?
So it is a very diplomatic history of the relationship between the government of India and its representatives in South Africa. They appointed agents and agent generals who became high commissioners of India. So my study is a 20-year history of this particular post. This was the government of India, of the British government of India. So their influence was to actually moderating influence on Natal politics, South African politics. So I had to go to India, and I have to acknowledge Issa Pahad's work, which was very responsible for me actually going to India to work in the National Archives, because all the correspondence between the agents and their government was there. And so that's why I spent 6 months there. I must say, when I look at that work, the thing that impresses me most is how accurate, how thorough, how well researched, but also how very boring it is. So diplomatic history, is a different kind of history. And I want to, when I finished it, I was actually quite exhausted. If you have to compare with my master's, I actually published 3 articles out of my master's thesis, which is quite a record for any MA student. But if you look at my PhD, I hardly published out of that PhD. I just got very tired of that kind of thing, and I moved to more exciting things. And actually the group areas work actually followed on that. But I do very much want to look at that again. I don't think it has always been at the back of my mind that is a very important piece of work, that it is about a very important period of history. And I have all the files with me still, and I want to rewrite it, but rewrite it in a very, very different way. To look at the Sastri, to look at Kunwar Maharaj Singh, to look at the very last, Shafat Ahmed Khan, Deshmukh, and to look at them very differently in terms. So it's not to go over legislation and politics and so forth, but these were men who came from India and they saw South Africa in a particular way. So if I want to write about it again, I would write about the seeing of South Africa. It is definitely on my agenda for retirement, a retirement agenda.
I'm certain you've got a substantial body of work ahead post your retirement. So we all are looking forward to it. In fact, the 1868 Heritage Center is probably be your second home. We've got the SS Singh collection, which I'm sure you're willing to get your hands on. And so certainly when you are in Durban, that is available for you. How do you go about choosing topics on research? Especially, now this is Ghulam speaking, I'm especially interested in your book, From Cane Fields to Freedom. And while we're on the topic of cane fields to freedom, I just want to point out, here's the book. But Uma, you'll be pleased by the amounts of notes that are in the book. And that's one of the greatest tributes to an academic, that your book is being widely referenced. So he goes on to say, the Cane Fields to Freedom, which is still spoke about today and much sought after. It's a very rare book. Can you tell us a little about the book, how you went about collecting and choosing photos, and what was the reaction to that?
So, I think of all the things that I've done, the book that I am proudest of is actually From Cane Fields to Freedom. The idea didn't originate with me. Anna-Marie van der Merwe was the editor of Kwela Books. And she came to me and she said, we would like to do this, and would you be able to take it on? And of course, I'm always very diffident about myself. And I said, I'm not sure I can do it. And then I said, yes, okay, I will do it. And so it was very well funded. And I traveled around South Africa, to all the major libraries, speaking to people. And I think one of my big moments was when I was in Durban and I contacted Ranjit Kali and I said, do you have any photographs? And he came with a portfolio of photographs. I was so blown away, but I also made sure that the publishers paid him his worth for those photographs. I don't think there's any worth, the worth is so high, we could never match it, but at least he got paid well. I see his photographs being circulated today and nobody even says that's a Ranjit Kali picture. And I know all Ranjit's pictures. Omar Badshaw was similarly so generous. I sat on the floor of Omar Badshaw's house in Pretoria and he spread all his photographs there. And he just said, yeah, just take whatever you want, and he never took a cent for his photographs. Although I was asked to do this book, I shaped the book very, very, with a very firm focus. For instance, the publishers wanted to put a very rich family. There was a photograph taken by George Hallett. It was a lovely photograph, but it was of a very rich family. And I said, you cannot put this picture on the cover. I will not have this wealth displayed on this cover of my book, because my book is actually about breaking stereotypes. It is about the stereotype of the rich Indian in Durban. And so I actually wanted to put a picture of a woman who's working on the tea estates on the front cover, but they wouldn't have that. They said, well, poverty doesn't sell. And so the cover that you lifted up and showed to people is of a young girl. It was a compromised photograph. It doesn't say anything. It's a young girl. That's what it is. But if you open the book, the minute you open the book, there are snapshots of the indentured workers. It was a very controversial photograph for me because I picked it up in an apartheid publication, pictures of indentured workers. We cannot find these collection of indentured worker photographs, which Mauritius has, but we don't. It must be there, but nobody's been able to locate it. These were the few photographs which show the indentured numbers and the workers when they came from India. And so when you open the book, that is what hits you first. And one of the things about the book is that it also drew on family photographs. So people open that book and they see themselves there. And what the most meaningful thing about the book for me is that people who don't normally read books bought like 7 to 8 copies of that book, because they saw something in it and they learned something in it. So it was kind of social history, making history accessible to the public through photographs with a sort of a short indented comment. And so people could learn something while looking at the photograph. It's not just looking at 1,000 photographs, but to also learn something about it.
Well, we've certainly learned a lot from that book, and I'm glad that you have penned it. Your biography on Manilal Gandhi is exceptionally well written, a model of good biographical writing, and was well received in academic circles. This is now Ghulam speaking. I do, however, recall it creating problems with you and some family members. Tell us a bit about that and how you coped with the stress. Do you have any regrets about, do you have any regrets about that part of your life?
I don't regret anything because one always learns from one's experiences. But so the title of the book is called Gandhi's Prisoner. Now it has a question mark. So if I have to give any young people any advice, I will say, don't ever ask a question in the title of a book, a question that takes 400 pages to answer, and in which the question is neither yes, no, no. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Also, my family were extremely supportive. I mean, my aunt Ila said nothing, about the controversy when it's actually the media that caused the controversy. It says new book says Gandhi was a dictator. Now, if you open the book, you will never find anything like that in the book. The book is written with very warm words. What I did say is that he was very strict on his sons, but that he also loved his sons. And so there's this, balance and the difficulties that this relationship produced. And of course, the newspapers ran with the first half of it, is that he was very hard on his sons. He was a disciplinarian and he was a dictator. Nowhere in my book do I use words like that. So unfortunately, that circulated like wildfire across the world. It had the benefit in that I suddenly became well known, everywhere. I have to say, E.S. Reddy was one of my toughest critics. He wrote to me, Uma, what have you done? So you have made the world's most famous prisoner. You are now accusing him of being a jail, a person who's imprisoning others. And so, but yes, when he realized how distraught he made me very distraught. And I would email him at 1 o'clock in the morning. And then he would write back, go to sleep now. It's okay. And, I think people didn't like the idea of questioning Gandhi. And I think one must always do that. I'm glad I never showed this title and book to anybody. I'm glad I did it as it did. But if I had to redo it, I would make it more peaceful, because the book is a peaceful book. And then the question kind of just agitates, and I don't think that was the idea of the book. And it also shifted focus from Gandhi's son Manilal to Gandhi. Everything was about Gandhi again, and I wanted the focus to be on Gandhi's son. So I would redo the title, but the title comes from Gandhi's own letter. It comes from a letter in which he says, You are not my prisoner, you are my friend. So he uses those words, but that is because he senses his son's feelings. And then he goes on to say, this is what you should do. And if you can do what you like, but if you do what you like, then you may not be the right person to run Indian opinion. And so there's this catch. The man is caught between loving his father and, wanting to do things and not being entirely free. So yeah.
It's amazing, and it's so important that the family dynamics are exposed, and you exposed it through a question. Prof. Jairam was mindful of the time. There was one question that Ghulam had raised: the Gandhi legacy, burden or blessing?
I don't think you could ever say it's a burden, because I think being part of the Gandhi family meant being exposed to so many things, and Phoenix settlement is so precious to me, and all the experience that I got out of there, it is not at all, it is a model for behavior. But not all of us can aspire to that. I became an academic. He didn't quite like academics. So I think we all carve our own places into the world. And it is an absolute honor, to have been part of this family and to be able, to do things and to actually learn to be a bit fearless. One of the lessons is also about mixing with people freely across all religions and races, and I see all these as riches. I wasn't brought up in a very narrow Gujarati environment, bound by caste, bound to the temple. I lived freely. I lived with many, many religions in my life, and I lived with many people in my life across the ranges. And the fact, I suppose, that I could write about my family is also something, it is part of who I am.
Great to hear. Ghulam wants to end, on a few short questions. And so we'll end, and I think we're doing well for time as well. What are you currently working on? Why did you work on this project, and when will it be published?
So as usual, I end up with one thing and then I get diverted and end up doing a whole lot of things. It's the kind of advice you tell students: focus on one thing and finish it. So I was working on a history of Indians in Cape Town, and that is still something that I am going to complete, but I've put it on the back burner for a while. I'm almost in the process of finishing off a very big manuscript on the history of Phoenix settlement from 1904 to 2021. I've just got important introductions and conclusions to write up. And it is to tell the story of Phoenix settlement through letters. So I've collected like 400 letters. It's going to be far too big a book. It's a big book. It's a very big book at the moment. And through letters, I tell the history of Phoenix settlement. A very important part of the book are the sort of 80 to 90 letters that I have of my grandmothers, which were written in Gujarati, that have been translated. And it actually tells a lot about the women in my family and her role at Phoenix settlement in running Phoenix long after her husband died and keeping it going. So they're very important parts to that book. It's a book very precious to me, but the number of projects that are waiting in line after that are actually huge.
We certainly you'll finish quite a lot of those things that we all look forward to reading them and getting our hands on. How has the university as an institution changed from the time that you started in 1970s?
So, I've been at so many universities, at UDW, and then University of Cape Town, and then Natal University, and then my university. And, each university has its own institutional culture. But what I observe all round is the move to bureaucracy. I mean, nobody told me, Uma, go and write articles out of your master's. I did it myself, and I did it for the love of the subject. And and so too, all the articles that I subsequently did. Now it's a sort of a reward system. It's a counting of how many publications, and it's not how many publications you have. If I have to give young people advice, I will say, write one good quality article instead of five, you know, really mediocre articles where you've chased mediocre journals, because the university wants you to publish as much as you can. So the incentive that is attached to writing articles is actually working in a negative way, in which we have a lot of mediocre work being produced. But the worst still, I think, is the sort of the bureaucratization of the university and the forms that one has to fill. I went on leave in 2019. I returned in 2020. And one of the big things that was hitting our faculty was that students had to fill in umpteen forms to claim tutor money. How many hours did you work? Have it verified by the lecturer, have it verified then by the head of the department, have it verified then by the dean. This is just not the way a university should function. And that you shift attention from the intellectual aspects of a university to management and bureaucracy and paperwork. And so I'm actually very happy to have quit the university, because this was becoming, such a negative part of the university. And so I think I'm free of this, but who knows?
It's excellent. One of the questions that Gulam, one of his next question was about advice for young budding historians, but I think you've answered it with the previous question. But just to expand on the topic, I'd like to ask this question. I know you're often on Facebook, and you often spoke about. You often spoke about. So you often spoke about breaking with agency and how you're able to access new information. Professor Lal also spoke about that in terms of breaking agency. Your particular thoughts on this, and I know you write regularly on Facebook and so on. And where are we in terms of?
Selton, you're breaking up so badly, I didn't get the question.
Okay, just give me a second. I'm just wondering whether there's.
Yes, there's interruption, so.
Just going to just check on that. Give me a few seconds.
Sorry, Gita Nas.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry about that. There was some breakup. I'm not able to migrate between devices. But, as I said, you break with agency in terms of looking at information on Facebook and other sources as well. How is that and the use of social media, particularly now? I know you spend a lot of time in the archives, and that becomes, dog body work. Today, with the access to social media and so on, how is that changing the role of historians in accessing information and breaking new ground?
Yeah, I think the social media can provide some really interesting topics, but also some ethical questions about how you use social media. So, for instance, I find the Grey Street Casper group a very interesting group to follow, because it is people's reflections on an area and so forth. And I think people. I'm a diehard archivist, archival historian. If the archives open tomorrow, I'll be there every day working in the archives. I don't think you can beat that. And also, I think oral history is a very important, source of history, but also something that, the oral histories themselves can be studied for how people narrate their histories. So for me, archives and oral histories will always be the main, things that I would go to in terms of history, and not social media, as much. I think social media is important for the kind of keeping up to date with what's happening. It's like a gossip place. Facebook is a gossip place. But and you find out who's doing what and so. But I don't treat it as a serious site where I'm going to, do my research. Actually.
Absolutely. Certainly a break from your work.
So, Selwyn, I just wanted to, say one thing which I didn't say at the beginning. And I wanted to say, that sort of growing up in Grey Street, we never called it the Casbah, but you actually, the minute you left Grey Street, you entered white hostile Durban. And so I wanted to say about how actually difficult it was to be a historian at that time, because you had to go to places like the Don Africana Library, which was in the city center. And the first thing you see on the doors of the Don Africana Library is whites only. And you stand outside there and you say, I'm registered for a master's now. Can I go in? And you don't know what your fate is going to be when you open that door. But I pushed open the door and actually they received me well, but discrimination was there everywhere, in West Street area, in terms of even in the archives in Pietermaritzburg, although you were welcomed there, toilets are a very important topic about apartheid. Big signs, you know, um, whites only. And so, these are some of the discriminatory elements in doing research in the 1970s and actually going through those hurdles. I used to go for piano classes in Poynton House, and my music teacher was on the seventh floor. For every lesson, I climbed 7 floors because the elevator said whites only. So we mustn't forget those times, which were not easy times, and going to universities where your lecturer said, you rubbish. I mean, to go through a first year lecturer like that, I think I feel sorry for my whole cohort of students who went through that. Some of them actually dropped out.
It's amazing that so much of these struggles and essentially some of these struggles are not being documented as well. So it's amazing that you were able to survive through all of that and be able to produce the way you have. Finally, whether you like to acknowledge it or not, historical writing is a political occupation. How do you reduce the impact of your values and biases on your work?
Oh gosh, I thought we were finished with the interview and it's just beginning to relax.
This is the last question.
I actually don't think you can. One of the things about writing history is you must start off by acknowledging your subjectivities. You start by saying, this is what you are. And you work from the point of view that you cannot overcome these subjectivities, but you acknowledge them. And so I always do that, and when you write with a particular objective in mind, when I write about land restitution, I have the interests of the people who are claiming land for first and foremost in mind. But that does not mean that I'm going to skew anything, but that I'm writing for them and about them. And that is how you kind of strike a balance, that you admit, what it is that you are doing. So I hope that answers your question.
Certainly does. I certainly know you not to sanitize any form of history. Uma, just to end, and these are the words of Ghulam, and for those of you that have joined late, regrettably Ghulam Vaid could not conduct the interview as he's ill, but he's put these questions together so that we'd be able to interview Uma. And he says, we'd like to thank you and wish you well, the very best in your retirement. While you may have retired from the university, I'm sure that there would be no retirement for Professor UMA DHUPELIA-MESTHRIE, the historian. If anything, I'm confident that your best work is still to come, as you've already outlined. So we all look forward to that. Thank you, Ghulam, for putting these questions together, and thank you, Uma, for allowing us to interview in this manner. Certainly, it is recorded and will be available on YouTube a little later on, so great for future historians and for us as a record. I'd like to hand over to Professor Jairam to conclude or to continue with the program. Thank you, Professor Jairam. You're able to join us.
Uma, you can relax now. Whenever Ranjani is around, ask him to bring you a cup of tea while we have some other speakers who will probably not interview or interrogate you, but will make some statements relevant to your work. The first person I want to call upon is Rowan Brander, who is a member of the board of the 1860 Heritage Centre, and I believe that he will read a statement on behalf of Professor Ramesh. Professor, is it Ramesh Bharatram? Oh, is it? Who is, I believe was a contemporary of UMA at UDW. Rowan, are you around? Could you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Just go.
Yes, I think before I commence with Ramesh's words, I would just add that maybe the meeting that you referred to with Srini and Sats and the argument with the NIC resuscitation probably happened at Bolton Hall. And I remember writing about a very vocal Ravi Bhagwandin taking the tour of the Black consciousness activists on. I don't know whether that's the same meeting that you attended, but that struck me when you were speaking. But also the point you make about Professor Olivier and these third-rate white academics that were thrust upon us, as Bush colleges in positions of power and positions of postdoctoral supervision and doctoral supervision, and we had to subjugate our research, to accommodate this kind of prejudice. You pointed to it in your talk, in your answering the questions. And I just wanted to add a quote to your comments about the agents generals of South Africa and how they saw South Africa. And a very poignant quote for me, and one stuck in my mind, comes from Sir Srinivasa Sastry, who, as you know, founded Sastry College. And one of my favorite quotes from him was, "What the Indian learner lacks in facilities, he more than makes up for in faculties." And I thought that's a very poignant quote, and it's in my grandfather's book, Sastry Speech, if you're going to quote it. But let me come to the point at hand. I, as you know, work quite closely with Professor Ramesh Bharatram on the UWC press imprint. And when I mentioned that we are going to be doing a webinar farewell to you, he bemoaned the fact that he's going to be traveling via air to Johannesburg and would not be able to join. And I asked him to share with us his sentiments on working with you and Rajan. So if you'll indulge me now, I'll just read that. "It is indeed a privilege to pen a tribute to UMA, since I cannot attend the event due to another engagement. I met UMA for the first time when she joined the academic staff of the University of Durban-Westville. Our relation grew closer when she and our good friend Rajan Mesthrie, an esteemed scholar in his own right, got married. Not much later, UMA and Rajan moved to the Western Cape, Rajan to University of Cape Town and UMA to the University of Western Cape. Our paths crossed again in 2008 when I joined UWC as Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, after being convinced by Vice Chancellor Brian O'Connell to be interviewed for my post in my second year as Dean of the Faculty of Science at the University of the Witwatersrand. Brian was already succeeding with a range of remarkable achievements, in particular transforming UWC from a bankrupt institution to a financially stable university with an expanding set of academic programs accompanied by growth in student numbers. Brian was on the final leg of his term in office, during which, as per his initial vision, he was determined to guide UWC into becoming a research-led university. Brian and I were strategically decided to base our strategies and interventions on the cohort of UWC scholars who are at the very cutting edge of their disciplines and already having an impact in the national and international spaces. UMA DHUPELIA-MESTHRIE was identified as one of the strongest scholars in the humanities and social sciences at UWC. Shortly thereafter, we identified UMA, together with a very small cohort of other UWC scholars, as a potential UWC candidate for an NRF South African Research Chair, the most prestigious individual research appointment in our country. Sadly, with a very busy academic and personal life, UMA declined to be nominated. Her subsequent B1 NRF rating as a scholar, which by definition indicates that a number of international scholars consider UMA to be a world leader in her field, bears testimony to the stature of the scholar that UMA DHUPELIA-MESTHRIE is. UMA's work on India-South African mobilities, on locally on forced removals, land restitution and relocation on the Cape Flats constitute an indelible contribution to the historic evolution of South Africa, from apartheid to constitutional democracy. We thank UMA for joining and remaining at UWC and through her scholarly outputs, helping to destroy the myth that excellence in scholarship was the preserve of the historically advantaged institutions in South Africa. On behalf of Brian O'Connell and myself, we thank you for walking the journey with us at the very front in realizing Brian's vision that UWC, in inverted commas, must do good science. And its academics, like yourself, must stand alongside and engage with the best in the world. Finally, a message to UMA. As you are aware, retirement in academia in South Africa is by default not determined by your productivity, but by a prescribed age upper limit. As Emeritus Professor at UWC with a wealth of knowledge and expertise, you cannot retire. Those of us who have walked the journey from apartheid to our present democracy under severe discriminatory constraints and yet been successful, have an obligation to our country's transformation and redress agenda, of which we have addressed just the tip of the iceberg. We need to mentor and guide the new generation of scholars and thought leaders, especially Black South Africans, into leadership positions. Also to share the strategies and interventions responsible for UWC's success with other institutions, especially the historically disadvantaged and newer universities. As a former Deputy Dean for Research in the Faculty of Arts and a member of the University Research Committee and its Senate, you are ideally placed to do so. To Omar and Rajen, two outstanding scholars, the simplicity, humility, and dignity with which you both have carried yourselves are hallmarks of greatness. I have been privileged to not only know you both, but also to have walked parts of that academic journey with you. For that, I am indeed grateful and thank you. Ramesh Bharat Ram, Emeritus Professor, University of Western Cape.
Thank you very much, Nirod, and thank you, Professor Bharatram, for those moving and inspirational message. I'd like to now call upon Kalpana Hiralal. I hope she's around. She is, Professor of History at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and I think she has followed, the work of UMA MESTHRIE very carefully and has been inspired by it. Can I ask now, turn the microphone over to Professor Hiralal.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Brady, and thank you, Selvin, for giving me this opportunity to say a few words. I'm really honored to be part of this panel and paying tribute to UMA. Hello, UMA. I hope you're well, and hello, everyone. Honestly, when I received Selvin's WhatsApp message about the tribute for UMA, I was quite surprised to read that, we were having this tribute and that UMA was retiring. And I think UMA, a few days ago, I even alerted you to that when you communicated, but nevertheless, it just shows how time flies. UMA, this tribute is a very short one, but it is a very sincere one because I wanted to state that you're one of the best historians that I know. You may not know this, but you have actually served as a role model for me in many ways as a historian. Now, what strikes me most about your scholarship is your meticulous work, your ability to kind of push boundaries, and the importance of broadening historical investigations. And your scholarship, I think, has shaped the current understanding, particularly of the Indian Ocean histories, something that I'm very passionate about and currently I'm focusing on. Particularly in identifying gaps and exploring them, and in the process, kind of unearthing new information, and kind of shifting the hidden narratives from the margins to the center. And here I would like to highlight your work on the passenger Indians. I know in recent years, your work on the passenger immigrants has sought to kind of address this neglected aspect of Indian Ocean histories, and by focusing on how women have traveled, the nature of the paperwork and travel prerequisites, and whether migration kind of leads to a loss or gain in the status of women. And here I like to pay particular attention to your papers on, the form and the permit and the photograph, the passenger Indian as a worker, Indian immigrants in Cape Town, false fathers and false sons, as well as the one on split households in Cape Town. So these are really, really fantastic scholarship, particularly in the Indian Ocean region. And I was particularly impressed with how you kind of problematize notions of the term passenger, the terminology passenger Indian. And I think you are the first historian to actually explore that at a very in-depth level, and thus kind of eliminating the stereotype that the passenger Indians, were kind of very wealthy, rich, when it was basically the opposite. They were far from affluent, etc. And your work on this subject has actually influenced and shaped my thinking on how to approach, document the passenger class in Natal, and more significantly, to explore the gendered voices, excuse me, in the Indian Ocean travel. The oral histories, the Roots project that you alluded earlier, I must say that I have looked through every one of them. They are all digitized and you can get them off the net. And they are actually a rich treasure trove of narratives that I think, if we really want to understand indenture better and the histories of the passenger Indians, it's an excellent, rich archive of information. But I think a lot of people do not even know that these oral histories exist. But I have used them, and these oral histories, particularly I've identified at least 6 oral histories of women, which I found to be extremely important. And I've used them to problematize, trying to understand the role of archives, biasness within the archives, within the gendered narratives. Excuse me. So, and over the years, I know you have received you reviewed many of my articles and a manuscript, and your comments in most instances were quite spot on. They were critical, constructive feedback, challenging me to kind of think beyond traditional boundaries, to explore new sources, both against and along the grain of the colonial archive, and thereby shaping my thought processes and writing style. Good historians know their craft and has a respect for historical evidence, a passion for history, and the ability to think, reflect, debate, and understand context. So you have encompassed all these characteristics and have emerged as a highly respected scholar both here and at home and abroad, sorry. In conclusion, Uma, I'm glad that we had this tribute because this afternoon, just listening to your life story, you reminiscing about your past as an academic, particularly being a scholar during the time of apartheid and how it shaped your academic life. I think this in itself is historical and for our future scholars and academics. So thank you. We have met over the years several times at conferences, workshops, and it was always a pleasure chatting to you. Whenever I emailed you for assistance or information, you always obliged and you were always approachable. And I've benefited from your wisdom and your guidance. So as you retire, I wish you many more years of happiness and success in your scholarly endeavors. Thank you.
Professor Hiralal, thank you very much for that complimentary, thoughtful, and moving message. Thank you. Let's move on now. The next person is Dr. Betty Govenden. Betty, I hope you're around. Could you unmute yourself?
Yes. Thank you. Who can tell the time? What time is it? Who are the time travelers? Thank you for this opportunity to share a few words. Tracing the roots of Professor UMA DHUPELIA-MESTHRIE's scholarship is a history lesson in itself. UMA is one scholar who has made brave, imaginative leaps into lands that have lain uncharted, and these may be across the ocean or around the corner. Yes, our historian, a critical and intrepid one that is, like UMA, is a cartographer, a map maker. And one of the most challenging parts of one's approach to one's scholarship is to ask how your discipline is constructed. Who decides what is the ideology behind such a construction? Should I follow the predictable line, or should I take the detour and engage in reimagining the discipline? In this, UMA is indubitably an organic intellectual, actively engaged, shaping and reshaping the world of ideas in order to shape and reshape how we live in this world and to reimagine ourselves in our manifold roots and roots. UMA began early by expanding the parameters of South African history from its insular, bounded, Eurocentric approach, and the direction she chose is instructive. We need to remember that UMA's approaching of India as a field of study and pursuing the India-South Africa connection was an attempt to shift and displace Europe as the center of gravity, a case of provincializing Europe. Her work showed the developing critical solidarity in the South, and she's indeed become an eminent scholar of the South. Her work is against the background of India's support for the anti-apartheid struggle and the important flourishing of Africa-Asia solidarities with the camaraderie we saw of the non-aligned movement in the 1950s. UMA works foremost as an African scholar and intellectual, and it is from this vantage point that she begins to look at India and encounters with worlds beyond South Africa and Africa. In her work, Cultural Crossings from Africa to India, and in other research that she has done using biographies and autobiographies, memoirs and oral histories, for example, those of Sita Gandhi, Pregs Govender, Dr. Gunham, Asha Dowd, and a few others, UMA raises important questions of identity, of Africanness in India. And this work shifts the gaze to travel in the South rather than from the metropole to the South. Similarly, in her studies of repatriation from South Africa to India, Africa is the center. The same is true of her scholarship on the Gandhi figures she writes about. Her writings on Manilal Gandhi, Sita Gandhi, Shushila Gandhi all have a variety of interests, but it's highlighting their identification, dedication, and service in different ways to their African home that I find very, very instructive. While UMA works with the larger transnational themes, empire, slavery, indenture, and transnational mobilities that emerge from them, it's very important to note that UMA also works at the local level and shows how the transnational plays out at the local level. And she shows how the local inflects the global histories. Her research has contributed in no small measure to deepening our understanding of South Africa and its locatedness in transatlantic and trans-Indian ocean circuits and exchanges. Conversely, her research, for example, the research she's done on Durban and Cape Town as port cities, is very much about how transnational histories are inflected by local South African histories. What I find, and this has been mentioned already, what I find very interesting and important is her current work and recent work on transnational local memory studies, also her work on relocation and work around the group areas legislation. We have mentioned this already, and so I'd just like to say, summarizing from my notes, that we should remember that UMA's work is invaluable in post-apartheid South Africa and constitutes an important continuation of the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it needs to be read widely and heeded widely and responded to more widely. I'd like to quickly move on to questions of identity that I have found invaluable in UMA's work. Unfortunately, at this time, we cannot probe this further, but I think it's a crucial issue given the unrest we recently had in South Africa and especially in KwaZulu-Natal. I think UMA's research gives us much to ponder over on questions of Indian identity in the context of transnational identities, but also in the context of local and national identities. UMA's research compares questions of Indian identity in KZN with Cape Town, for example. Indeed, important in UMA's work is the insertion of Cape Town as a port city into transnational histories of oceanic travel alongside Durban. And coming from Durban myself, although at the moment I'm speaking to you from Johannesburg, I think this is a very important corrective of how we are doing history in the country. Her research also looks more circumspectly and critically at questions of Indian identity, comparing Durban or KZN and Cape Town, and raises questions that we need to reflect upon and question. As we know, there was a certain fixing of Indian identity during apartheid, and this has endured in some ways into the post-apartheid era. And I should like to quote from one of my favorite books that you probably know, from Echille Mbembe on the critique of Black reason. And he writes, "To build a world that we share, we must restore the humanity stolen from those who have historically been subjected to practices of abstraction and objectification. From this perspective, the concept of reparation is not only an economic project, but also a project of reassembling amputated parts, repairing broken links, relaunching the forms of reciprocity, without which there can be no progress for humanity." Indeed, UMA has been searching for these forms of reciprocity in new and daring spaces, and places, and it's time we began to do the same. Mbembe also speaks of the ethic of restitution and reparation and the construction of the common. And in many ways, I see UMA's work doing and leading precisely to this. And so I should like to conclude with a poem that I've composed for you, Uma. It's called Relocating. And as you know, with my poems, it's a collage and it draws from various sources, so it's full of footnotes. So here is this poem with my love. For Uma. You ferret out roots and roots, filigreed in paper regimes, bodies transported like chattel, wafted by trade winds over the black waters. You conjure up the alchemy of memory, slowly unlock the archives, fortresses of bureaucracy, violence of decrees determining the destiny of the wretched of the earth. You travel over land and sea, ferreting out stories submerged, wafted by the wind, of those setting down new roots in a strange land. You linger, read between the lines, weave memories upon memories, cross-stitched, wanton uprooting and displacing by apartheid's Group Areas Act. With the compass of your pen, you decipher the illegible will, tell of the oppressor's wiles, lost lives and unfulfilled dreams, families sundered by injustice, and memory ghosts that haunt the ruins of tenements. Tracing the longing to belong, you showed the relentless search of the discarded peoples, shunned to the city's peripheries, to find a footing. History is the home address. You cry justice, those exiled and unhoused, locked in vaults, memories that shift and relocate, the haunting silence of loss, laments and anguish of history, forever etched in pages. You touch the parchment, feel the visceral between the lines. You tell of the sensual knowledge. You ask what expiation, redemption, in the quest for restitution. And to end with the pressing questions with which I began, and from one of our young activists, Leanne Naidu, who can tell the time? What time is it? Who are the time travelers? I want to suggest, Uma, you're one of our time travelers. Stay well, stay strong, we love you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betty, and thank you for reminding us of a number of critical aspects of UMA scholarship, and as usual, for your warm and moving poem. Thank you. We miss you in Durban, but stay safe and be well. We have, colleagues, a few other speakers. I would like to appeal to the other speakers to try and keep to a time limit of no longer than about 5 minutes, so we could conclude in our allotted time. The next speaker I'd like to call upon is Professor Nilesh Bose. Nilesh, are you around?
Yes, I am. I'm unfortunately unable to log in
unmute
earlier.
yourself. And
Yes. Okay, I presume everybody can hear me. And I apologize, I was unable to log in earlier. There were some technical difficulties here in the United States of America. I'd like to thank everyone for the invitation. And it is a great honor to be here in this group. I would like to say, and I will keep it very brief because the time is behind us, but I only had the chance to meet Uma in person a few years back, but I have been reading and learning from her work for the last several decades when I was introduced to her work by one of my first teachers, Dennis Brutus, who taught me in Pittsburgh at the University of Pittsburgh many decades ago. And when I asked him about this topic, he referred me to Uma's work. And I had encountered her work in libraries throughout the world, throughout the United States, throughout Canada, and throughout England, and also in India. And as many have said already, UMA's work traverses a variety of methods. It traverses a variety of sites of scholarship. There is very little for me to add to this discussion that has not already been said, but I would like to state a few words about the nature of commitment. And this is something that I believe that all of us have learned, and I know I have learned from UMA, and I have continued to be inspired by. And it is the commitment both to a local history as well as to a global understanding of a commitment to humanity. And this is something that I feel I have detected in UMA's work and that I continue to learn from. As other speakers have mentioned, UMA has focused on various aspects of Indian South African life, as well as aspects of port cities like Cape Town and Durban, as well as opening and showing a layer of openness to various turns in history and the discipline, the study of the Indian Ocean, the study of memory, but yet the commitments remain. Some of the names that those of us who work in this field continue to change across the layers of historical periods. Terms like Asiatic have often been used to describe Indians throughout the world. Terms like overseas Indian, and now terms like South Asian. And all of these terms, they come and they go, but the commitment to a local history and a commitment to South Africa in particular, but also to a solidarity across borders is something that has never been abandoned by UMA, the local as well as being open to the global. And I would say that in ending my brief comments here, there's no way for me to follow Betty's extraordinary poem, but I would just like to say that for all of my love that I send from here in North America, it is heartening to me to see people from all over the world gathered here to recognize UMA's life, her career, and I send only all of my love for you to this next passage and journey in your life. Thank you.
Prof, you need to unmute. Professor Jera? Okay, I think
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, all good, thank you. Go ahead.
Professor Boza, if you missed me, thank you very much for your message. And let's move on to the next speaker. And I believe the next speaker is Professor Isabel Hofmeyr, who was from WITS originally, and I believe she is now a global professor at NYC. Over to you, if you could hear me, Isabel.
Professor Reddy, this is a message from Isabel.
Is it a message you're going to be reading?
Yes.
All right, please go ahead, Betty.
So, Uma, this is from Isabel, our mutual friend. Dear Uma, congratulations on your retirement and on an exemplary career which has been a model to us all. In the early 2000s, I became interested in the Indian Ocean world and South African Indian histories as part of it. I was most fortunate to have Uma's work and presence as a guide. She has been the pathfinder who enabled so many of us to follow. Anything she wrote was always scrupulously researched, meticulously argued, conceptually rich, and eloquently written. She never sought to make easy, fashionable arguments or use slipshod, trendy concepts. Instead, her work resonated like a bell with her own moral integrity and courage. Thank you, Uma, for all you have bequeathed to us. Your work will be read for generations to come. I wish you a wonderful retirement and know that many more beautiful books and articles will emerge. With love and respect, Isabel.
Betty, thank you. And would you convey our thanks to Isabel Hofmeyr for that kind message? Betty, will you be reading the next message as well?
Yes.
On behalf of Antoinette Burton? Please go ahead.
Uma, this is from Antoinette Burton, and she's the professor, as you know, from the University of Chicago and works on the history of the British Empire. And she writes this to you. Salutations and warmest wishes to Uma on her retirement. Through her career as a scholar, she has modeled the very best of what history can be. Fiercely principled, recuperative of experiences and people whom the official archive has ignored or despised, an interdisciplinary thinker with an eye for the visual as well as the textual, a critical custodian of family memory, and an advocate for a politically engaged vision of our craft. Thank you, Uma, for all you have given me personally and professionally. I feel so lucky to know you, and I continue to learn so much from your inspiring work.
Betty, do convey to Antoinette our very kind, thanks for that lovely message from Antoinette.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I think that concludes the people that you wanted to speak about. Betty, am I correct?
That's right, yes.
All right. Thank you. Uma, we'd like to move on, to your graduate students now, your postgraduate students. And if I got your message, there's one from Cameroon, one from Namibia, and one from Malawi. Are they available to speak?
Yes, I think Prof. Reddy, just to introduce them, there's
Please do.
it's actually Dr. Clytus Likua, and he's a deputy director at the University of Namibia in the Center for Multidisciplinary Research. He's also the author of Voices from Kavango. It's a book that I based on his PhD, which I supervised. And so it's an honor to have him present here. And then secondly, it's Dr.
If I may stop you, let's have him first.
Take one at a time.
Then you can introduce
yes.
the next one.
Okay, so Clytus Likua.
Yes, thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to everyone from Namibia. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much to the 1860 Heritage Center History Society for bringing us together to celebrate the retirement of our beloved Professor UMA MESTHRIE. I'm actually thankful, very much thankful that we could be part of these deliberations, and extremely thankful to say a few words of gratitude, especially to the contributions that Professor UMA MESTHRIE made to my academic growth and indeed to the growth of other students. Well, Professor UMA MESTHRIE, in a previous speech, she spoke about her cohort of students at the university, some of who dropped out along the way. I was amongst those who didn't drop out, fortunately. So we are very thankful to have been part of Professor UMA MESTHRIE's journey. Maybe just to use Professor UMA MESTHRIE's own words, it was actually an affinity of interest in forced removals, in homeland policies, contract labor, and oral history that brought me, myself, and Professor UMA MESTHRIE in the years of my postgraduate studies at the University of the Western Cape in the History Department. And this bond actually is revealed in a photograph that she still held of the two of us, which she displayed in her office, at least until the year 2020. Prof. MESTHRIE was my lecturer and supervisor during both my MA studies, which was in 2004 to 2005, and also during my PhD studies from 2008 to 2012. And I'm actually extremely grateful that Professor MESTHRIE was always a supportive academic supervisor. And I remain with a very long-lasting impression of her extreme meticulousness, especially in pinpointing many of the shortcomings in my academic work and always suggesting constructive improvements. I remember, for example, very clearly that during some of our face-to-face supervision sessions, she always had a positive way to pinpoint my weak crafted written ideas and arguments, and to always suggest improvements. I remember that she would, for example, retort, and I remember her voice, Cletus, I think you were very tired when you wrote this. And I remember when she said such words, it actually meant the ideas were not good enough, but with more effort, I could actually rework and improve on those ideas. So Professor UMA MESTHRIE always instilled hope and a sense of pride in her students. And I remember very clearly one day when she told me, Cletus, you are my model student. That day I rushed straight to the dictionary just to be able to learn the word model, the meaning of the word model. And it meant perfect, exemplary, ideal, and I was truly encouraged. I was inspired to even work harder so as to maintain my status quo. And then I've always wondered what other inspiring, hope-filling statements did Professor MESTHRIE tell the other students rather than myself? So I think Prof. MESTHRIE, as you go in retirement, I encourage that you do not let go of your good ideas. Don't let go of all the social and academic networks that you have established over the years. You should not allow that they all retire with you, but you should continue to hold on to all the good networks, to the friends, the colleagues, all the networks that you have established over the years. And remember that we still need you more now than ever before. And I think I need to thank you for the love. I need to thank you for the support, and also to thank you for the good humanity qualities that you have actually shown over years to all of us. And certainly, I know that God and our ancestors are pleased with what you have achieved thus far, and they will continue to bless and to protect you. And at this note, I should say, all this I promise that God will protect you, and I promise at the verge of our deep Kavango River stream, all the way from Namibia. All the blessings for you, Prof. UMA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's gratifying to know that you had such a wonderful relationship with your supervisor. It's not always the case, but I'm delighted that it worked out so well for you. And I'm sure Uma also enjoyed supervising you. Thank you. And Uma, can I ask you to introduce the next postgraduate student of yours?
I'd like to ask Rosette Wuninga to come forward. Rosette, if you can unmute yourself. Rosette?
Yes.
Rosette is a current doctoral student in our history department. She's not my doctoral student, to my regret. She's come from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and I taught her in our third year, and I've known her and seen her grow dramatically over the last few years. And so I've asked her to say a few words, but I've also asked her to read out first a tribute that Dr. Mwai Lusaka wrote. Mwai Lusaka will be taking up a lectureship at Mzuzi University at the University of Malawi. And he was my master's student. And Cletus, I use different words for him. You might learn what he has to say. So Mwai has written out something. So Rosette, if you could please read that, and then you can speak for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. So this is from Dr. Mwai Lusaka. Her labor in the academy is not in vain. An appreciation and reflection of Professor UMA DHUPELIA-MESTHRIE's academic legacy from a former history graduate student. All protocol observed, today I feel humbled and privileged to be asked to reflect and appreciate the legacy of an eminent historian in the name of Professor UMA DHUPELIA-MESTHRIE on this occasion as we pay tribute to her work during the time of her active academic life. My task is both difficult and simple. On the one hand, it is challenging in the sense that it is not possible to provide a comprehensive narration or appraisal of a giant's life as well considering the career that spanned decades with a long and diverse list of publications. On the other hand, it's simple in the sense that I can claim that I came to know Prof. Uma up close as my mentor and supervisor at master's level. My reflection on her work is therefore informed by this supervisory relationship, and I am hopeful that this personal perspective will highlight some significant qualities of Prof. Uma and how she has impacted on many of her students like me during her illustrious academic life. My early encounter and engagement, or I should say entanglement with Prof. Uma was in 2014 when I became her student for the module on political biography and the liberation struggle in South Africa. I find it interesting that from her political biography class, today I'm constructing a biography of some sort. During one of the sessions in a class, it was discovered that all students had been allocated a supervisor and I was the only one without a supervisor. It also happened that Prof. Uma was just returning from her sabbatical leave and she had no students to supervise. It was therefore automatic that she became my supervisor for my master's research. It was through that relationship that I came to know, learn, and appreciate academic discipline, scholarship, and ways of doing it. It was during this time she influenced and impacted her scholarship on me. In the course of our student supervisor engagement, a number of significant qualities from her became manifest to me. Prof. Uma is a strict disciplinarian and indeed very tough, but for the best reasons. It was through this quality that I kept myself on my feet and up to date with my work. She is a kind of a professor who could go to extra length to help a students in their research work by even making efforts to understand their personal lives. Prof. Uma guided the completion of my MA research with cum laude. It was this experience that I had gained from her that laid a solid foundation for me to pursue my doctoral studies. But that was not the end of her support. As a professor, she strived to give her students a platform to shine and develop in their scholarship. For me, this was evident when she prescribed my MA thesis to be one of the key texts for her module. Not only did she prescribe my MA thesis, but invited me as a guest lecturer to this particular module. This was one of the most humbling, motivating, and inspiring moments that I have experienced in my student life. And this was only possible because of a spirit of developing and nurturing her students. I successfully managed to publish made an article in Southern African Historical Journal drawing for my MA thesis that she supervised. In 2017, an opportunity came in the Faculty of Art for an award to those who had just published their first peer-reviewed article. Unfortunately, I was not aware of this competition, but who else alerted me and encouraged me to submit my maiden article? Proud to say the article won the award in the Faculty of Art. This is just one of the instances of how caring, considerate, and motivating Prof. Uma has been to many of her students during the long service of her active academic life. It seems to me her academic life was a calling to prepare the young minds of not only South Africa but beyond to be civic, critical, and progressive citizens of the societies. I am proud to have been groomed and shaped by one of the towering scholars of history. Her intellectual and personal generosity showed me, then as a graduate student, what academia and scholarship could be, the future that were possible, and our own responsibility in making them happen. On behalf of all the students whom she impacted in different ways, and of course, on my own behalf, I say thank you, Prof. Uma. I've said that the impact of the Prof has been immense and her contributions immeasurable. In the word of James Baldwin, it is said that the responsibility of a writer is to excavate the experience of the people who produced him. And to sum up that, Prof. Uma belonged to that rare specimen of humanity with impeccable scholarly pursuit, and her labor in the academy is not in vain. Thank you all from Dr. Mwai Lusaka.
So Rosette, just go on. You can now follow on with your own little comment.
Okay. I will jump straight into it. Thank you for this honor. So although I heard there was a Gandhi Great Dot and History Department since 2008 when I started my first year at UWC majoring in history and sociology, it was not until 2010 that I met Prof. UMA DHUPELIA-MESTHRIE when she taught me memory and the city. We simply called her Prof. UMA. So this module engaged one of the saddiest and really most upsetting episodes of South African history, such as the forced removals. In class, we watched documentary films, but it is the one on Sapphire Town that haunts me the most. The dance, the music, the happy people, Miriam Makeba. But Professor Uma was never strong enough to comment after watching this film with us during our class, even though obviously it was not the first time she watched them. There was always emotion in her voice that she was about to cry. Well, I always cried, especially watching that Maraba dance. That's too I didn't know until I met Prof. Uma and I was part of her class. So it was at that moment that Prof. Uma stopped scaring me, as I discovered that behind her tough scholar woman face, yeah, she was one of those who did not joke with you, always serious. Okay, so I discovered that she was a very vulnerable human being. She was and is that woman I wanted to be like when I grow up, humble, intelligent, leading scholar. She discovered me when I was her student, and believe me, despite me then, there was no way Prof. Uma could not know me. I was one of those who sat in front in the lecture and who knocked at my lecturer's office door, whether it was consultation time or not. I always had questions to ask about what I did not understand well in class, what the tutorial essay or question really asked us of, or I wanted to understand why I got the grade I did last time on a tutorial or essay. She listened and was extremely patient with me, like all my history lecturers. I tried hard to do good as I wanted to qualify for honors history. I had to do good for me, but also to not look stupid in the eyes of Prof. Uma. She was very impressed with me. For the first time, I remember with the essay on Katima, Kenya. I never forgot how she was proud of me. She congratulated me repeatedly. And then I knew I had impressed her, and that, encouraged me to keep up the good work. Prof. Uma is one of those academics who are also men, but who do not brag about it. She was encouraging of me wanting to do honors, but she also knew of my struggles, including trying hard to manage between my economic survival, as a full-time waitress, and doing good at school. Or the scholarships advertised for honors were only for South Africans and also for people with passport numbers. Needless to say, I didn't have any of those. I was a refugee. Then, nevertheless, I kept applying, and Prof. Uma had never refused to write me a good reference in support of my applications. She knew I did not get any of the scholarship I was applying for. I had to, however, register for honors in 2011 without any plan of how I would pay for it. Then one day, a Medon scholarship offering 20,000 for honors was advertised in the Heart faculty, and guess who encouraged me to apply for it? Prof. Uma, and of course, she was one of my referees. I got that one, and it was good enough for my fees. I finished my honors in that 1 year and registered for my MA. I got the same rent, 30,000 again. And Prof. Uma remained supportive. But notice how I often look tired and occasionally sleepy during my MA classes. including that of political and autobiography, and she co-taught me with Prof. Rasool. So she knew about my work tracing job and sympathized, admired my courage and hard working. Later, I will discover that Prof really cared for me in a thought and wished to see me getting all the needed financial support to be able to focus the most on my studies. So during my MA, she made me one of the research assistants. That was an interesting learning process for me, as I've never done archival research through a microfilm and reading through more than a century years old newspaper. So researching on issues related on India and in the Cape. It was a good academic exercise, and the money I was paid helped me take out some of the work tracing shifts to focus more on my studies. Also, my first PhD scholarship advertised was first emailed to me by Prof. UMA. In fact, she had always sent me emails of opportunities I may qualify for. These emails were often short and half a line message. So I'm going to quote one. Rosette, Happy New Year. This scholarship may interest you, UMA. So this was sent to me on 14 January 2014, and that was a call to apply for NIHSS/Codesria for PhD. I got that one, ran 120 then. It was one of the first scholarships and the best in the country, okay, for me. The other email, and I quote, Rosette, you might want to apply for this. That was sent to me 15 June 2015. And it was an NGAP position at UWC. I'm happy to say I was shortlisted for that one. So, and whenever I needed anything, Prof was always happy to help with an advice and also, of course, a reference letter. So for me, it is an honor and privilege to have been taught by Prof. UMA. I'm set to see her retire now, all strong, beautiful, calm, wise, just like, the first time I met her as a history priest. Students 11 years ago. And I feel sorry for the future generation in history department at UWC who will not get to experience what I did with Prof. UMA. But you are here with us for many more years to come. In fact, forever through your impressive contributions to social history and oral history. Because through such work, especially in the stories on memory of Black River residents, which I like the most, so one of those unforcibly removed people when apartheid was at its best. And in this work, you really discover not just the history of people, but the human being that Prof. UMA is really. And she's also, for me, an activist scholar. So I love you, Prof. UMA. And I'll see you around for more daily reference. And I look forward for more emails of opportunities I qualify for. I have an SA ID now, a South African ID now, and of course a passport number. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. I think the ultimate tribute, Omar, when you hear tributes of this quality from your former students, and that's very, very gratifying and warm to hear, and all the best in your academic career. So I think that we have come to the end of our program. Am I right that we have covered all our speakers?
Correct, Professor.
Let me just make a few remarks as we close and probably hand over to Selvin. And we aim to finish this program at 5 o'clock. We are 5 minutes before time. And I want to thank all of the speakers, for keeping on time and for their tributes. In particular, Ghulam, despite your illness, thank you very much for a well-framed set of questions, which set the tone, I think, for a webinar this afternoon. And I hope you would recover and feel better. All of those who attended the webinar, at least on the Zoom, there were over 40 people. Thank you, for attending. I hope you found the afternoon worthwhile. Uma, in particular to you, thank you very much for attending, for making your time available, and for answering all of the questions, and for really sharing your very rich life with us and your rich scholarly life Thank you very much indeed. I hope that this, webinar we had this afternoon will be the beginning of a new life for you from retirement, and many people are looking forward to your contributions from now onwards, not least, your graduate students. And we want to wish you and Rajan a very happy retirement, in the Western Cape, and enjoy your time and all the best in your future scholarship. And with those remarks, Selvin, over to you. You may want to make a few concluding remarks yourself.
Thank you again, Prof. Before we close the program officially on Facebook and the recording process, we will make it available for a further chat, and I'm sure the chat post this conversation would be also very interesting. So if there's anyone from the floor on Zoom who would like to contribute, I know we're blessed by the presence of Professor David Dabadine, who represents the Amina Gufur Institute, and I know UMA is a patron of that institute. Professor Dabadine, are you able to contribute? I'm sorry to put you on the spot at this particular moment.
Well, thank you very much. I didn't really want to say anything about the Amina Gafur Institute on this occasion because I thought it was just wonderful just to listen to UMA and people speaking about her, especially the students. I was really moved by in fact, I choked up a bit listening to the students talking about their professor. So I just want to say very briefly, the Amina Gafur Institute sends their warmest best wishes to UMA, and we're absolutely delighted and honored to have such a senior scholar as one of our honorary patrons. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. If there's anyone else from the Zoom platform, family members and so on, who would like to contribute, we have a few minutes before 5 o'clock. Anand Jairaj, over to you, sir. Anand, are you able to connect? Yes, you are.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay. Uma, all the best on your retirement, but at this opportunity, I've seen some very interesting names in this, actually in attendance here. In 2018, when the 1860 indentured laborers, they hosted the conference on indenture, you were one of the first ones that I invited to be one of the speakers there, but in your own humility, although you are so learned, you say that you are not, equipped enough to do any presentation there, and you politely declined, to my disappointment. But it just shows your humility that although with that vast knowledge you have, you're still underestimating yourselves over there. And after listening to all the students of yours, it just shows that look at the humility and the quality of your humility that you have. But what I'd like to mention while we are here, that I see that 5 of my speakers at that particular conference, Ghulam Wayed, Rajan Mestri, Petty Governor, Kalpana Hiralal, Kalpana Hiralal, and there's one other also that that actually presented the papers. They are present here. And so are Jairam Reddy and Bridge Maharaj actually chaired each of the session. And Selvin, you yourself, you're one of the moderators, commentators, and analysts there. And the only person that's missing is actually Kiru Naidu here. And it makes me feel so proud to be here in the company of so many people, of such high prestige to, grace this occasion on your retirement. So with that, I just like to wish you everything of the best. And I also wish Rajan everything of the best for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If there's anyone else that we'd like to end off with, it's 5 o'clock very shortly. Uma, maybe we could end off with your concluding remarks and
I'll ask you one. Auntie Uma, thank you. I'm from Durban, and Auntie Uma's speech was such a lovely influence in our lives there. And thank you, Auntie Uma, and keep that up.
Thank you so much for that. Just a remark from one of your lecturers, Uma. She goes on to say in a WhatsApp message to me, what wonderful tributes to an amazing, humble and brilliant historian whom I had the privilege of lecturing to in our undergraduate years. Best wishes from Devi Rajab. So here's something from your lecturers. Betty, sorry, Uma, if we could hand over to you before we close off.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, this is just beyond my expectations. I know Kalpana so well, Gulam and Nilesh and Auntie Betty. And, I think even I didn't expect the kind of things that they said and their deep analysis of my work. And to have a poem from Auntie Betty, wow, that is something. I would like a copy. I'm sure I'll get it and I'll look at it carefully again. I wanted to thank Gulam for all the effort that he put into the questions. And, Gulam was also one of my students. I didn't teach Kalpana, but I taught Gulam for a while. And so it is always special. And then, I was simply blown away by everybody's comments and didn't expect all this, and especially to have my own students here and to have them speak. Some of them sent me their written tributes beforehand, so I teared when I read them. And so I was glad that they sent it to me in advance so that I would was really happy to see the Rosette. I had completely forgotten so much of all that. And so I'm so glad, that you reminded me of all those things. And I think I must be writing slightly longer emails, I think, at this moment. So just, to everybody, to my family who are present here, and, my husband and my daughter as well, who are here. I don't think I would do any of this without the support of my family. So, Kirti had to listen to everything about my master's thesis. She knew everything about it. And Satish used to always listen to everything about my Phoenix project. So, I wouldn't be here. My husband is partly hard of hearing, and I think it suits him because he listens to half the things that I say. And so, to all my family, I want to thank them especially for being what they are, for being there for me. Thank you.
In ending off, we wish you the best in your retirement. I'm certain that you have much work ahead of yourselves, albeit on a much more relaxed basis. Thank you again, everyone, for joining, and thank you to those who have joined on Facebook Live. We wish you well and you stay safe in these troubled times. We look forward to seeing you at our future engagements. Thank you again on behalf of the 1860 Heritage Center. Go well. Thank you so much. So I've stopped the live stream.